every 1 in 4 or 5 married couples out there, she is wanting sex more than he is. And the reason you're
Right.
not hearing about that sometimes is because those people have felt alone, not just the higher desire wives who may not want to speak up and share their
Right.
experience because
Uh-huh.
they already feel like a freak, but also lower desire husbands. I mean, how difficult that must be to be in a group of men and say, actually, I don't want sex as much as my wife. And maybe have some guy look at you like, well, then give me your man card.
Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. In the last few weeks, I've had 3 or 4 coaching calls with couples where the wife is the one with the higher desire for sex in their marriage. And one thing I've noticed about these wives is they feel so lonely. They think they're the only person on the planet that has the higher desire for sex. They often talk about how they hear about their other lady friends complain about how their husbands are always pursuing them and wanting to have sex with them and how they're tired of that. And they themselves, the higher desire wives themselves think, if only my husband pursued me that way. Is something wrong with me? Did I marry the wrong person? And they wonder about these things often. I have a great friend, Jay Parker. She's also the author of a recently published book that's fantastic called The Higher Desire Wife. I've invited her to be a guest on my podcast to talk about these very things. And to prepare for this episode, I reached out to my private Facebook group, which if you're not a part of, I highly invite you to join. Anyway, I invited the wives that are there who are the higher desire wives, and it had over 20 responses. What are some questions you want me to ask in this podcast episode? And we're going to address a lot of those here. So if you're the wife that's higher desire in your marriage, I just wanted to say you're very welcome here. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you. And of course, we're going to do a deep dive on all those things today, and I hope some of the questions you might have are answered in this episode. Jay, what an honor it is to have you back on the Get Your Marriage On podcast. How are you today?
Well, I think I'm the one with the honor. I'm excited to be here. I'm doing great.
So I first followed you in 2017. So it's been quite a while. And my wife and I loved your blog. We got your email newsletter. And I
Yeah.
remember one day you sent out a newsletter early in 2018 saying, I want to do more speaking engagements. Um,
Mm.
uh,
Mhm.
let me know. We'll talk to your church group. We'll talk to your whatever. So I emailed you and I said, I want to, invite you to speak to our group, but we might only have 20 couples there. Is that okay? And I don't know if you remember your reply,
I do not.
but you said, like I always say, size does not matter.
No.
And that's when I knew,
Wow.
yes, this is fantastic. So
Well,
I
but it
love
did
what you
the size actually did end up being more than 20 couples.
It did, it did,
So,
it did.
it
It
was it
was
was
just such
quite
a
a crowd.
humorous response from a woman that writes about sex all the time, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
and that's really what you are. You're hot, it's holy, and it's humorous, and then you just
Yeah.
bring that element to everything.
Yeah, when I originally was naming my ministry, I started out with Hot and Holy, and actually there was a blog that somebody else had started talking about
Uh-huh,
that, and I was like, "You know what? I just don't even think it's complete yet. There's something missing." And then when I came up
uh-huh.
with the humorous, I was like, "That's it," because
Yeah.
I kinda can't help but let my humor come out. And also, sex itself can be humorous. So, um,
Absolutely.
anyway,
That's so good. So today I wanna talk about higher desire wives.
yeah.
When was the first time you realized in your own life that you're the one with the higher desire?
Well, I have been everything in my marriage. So, we were pretty well matched when we were first married, and
Uh-huh,
so and there are percentage of couples that are pretty well matched, and that was us for the newlywed years. And then
uh-huh,
we had kids and everything changed, and I had very little desire. I still enjoyed when we had
uh-huh,
sex, but I just
uh-huh,
didn't have this independent drive to do it.
uh-huh.
And then kinda got out of that season, and then I came back up, and I realized at some point we were matched again, and then, I passed him up. And so I would say that was probably early 40s, something like that. So
Okay.
when I
Uh-huh.
was, getting there, and that there were numerous reasons for that, but it's a common thing actually for many of the higher desire wives to realize kind of as the kids have grown up, as maybe their hormones have shifted a little bit, and also as they feel more confident in their bodies and know sexually what works better for them, that
Mhm.
they start to really lean into that and suddenly like, I have more desire. And at the same time, from men aging, what I've heard, even for higher desire men, is they say the urgency can kind of go away.
Uh-huh. It
And
kinda peters
so,
out a little or whatever.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that's partly is because the decline in testosterone, but also because, you know, men don't have as much time and their stress, and there's just numerous things that happen with all that. So, that's how it happened for me. Some wives out there are higher desire from the I do, and
Uh-huh.
some get there at a different season.
So, did you feel alone in it, being a higher desire wife in that season?
Totally, completely. Not just alone. I mean, I knew there were
Uh-huh.
women out there, but I
Mhm.
think when I thought, "Oh, well, if I'm wanting sex so much more than he does, what does that say about him? But what does that say about me?" And kinda thought, "Well, those women who are like that, are they" well, I'll just use the word, "are they nymphos? Am I a
Uh-huh.
nympho? Is there
Uh-huh.
something wrong?" And so
Uh-huh.
I thought, "Well, I don't think I am, in which case maybe I'm just alone in this."
Uh-huh.
And you also feel alone in terms of some distance from your husband in that moment, and you
Mhm.
feel abnormal because that's not the scenario you may have heard about throughout your
Yeah, that's
life.
not the story that you've been following all along, and you don't fit the
And
story, so
yeah,
right.
and if you are around other wives and those wives are maybe complaining about their husbands wanting sex more or just saying, "Yeah, my husband's always ready for sex," and then you think, "Well, all these wives, they don't get me."
Right, right, right. So adding on to that, Jay, like, there are a lot of men that believe a higher desire wife is kind of a fictional fantasy, that they really don't they're not out there,
Yeah,
and, especially lower desire husbands might be saying that out of defense, like, "No, no, no, something's wrong with you, it's not me."
right, right. Actually, I've gotten some pushback since putting out this book, and, you know, I've heard stories of higher desire men who have only had that experience and have kind of been in circles where they've only heard about that experience. And
Mhm.
so they're saying things like, "Oh, well, yeah, there aren't many of such wives," or, "Well, after those 10 women in the world read your book, who else is going to benefit?" or things like that. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
you know what? It's not 10 women. I'll tell you, there's actually been, some research out there. And so I dug deep for this book because I wanted to know how many of us are out there. Are
Right.
you really
What's
alone? And so
Uh-huh.
I looked at a bunch of studies through the years and I concluded there's no way it's less than 15% of marriages. I can't find any statistics less than that. But
Right, right.
far more likely, it's 20 to 25% of marriages. So that means every 1 in 4 or 5 married couples out there, she is wanting sex more than he is. And the reason you're
Right.
not hearing about that sometimes is because those people have felt alone, not just the higher desire wives who may not wanna speak up and share their
Right.
experience because
Uh-huh.
they already feel like a freak, but also lower desire husbands. I mean, how difficult that must be to be in a group of men and say, "Actually, I don't want sex as much as my wife," and maybe have some guy look at you like, "Well, then give me your man card." You know?
Right, exactly.
And so
Uh-huh.
perpetuates itself in that a lot of people stay silent, and so then we don't think it's as many people as it is, when it actually is a prevalent issue.
I've also worked with couples in my coaching practice where she is the higher desire spouse, but after, like, the death by a thousand paper cuts of rejection, she shuts down her sexuality in a way that now it's like, "Oh, who's the higher desire now in the marriage?" She otherwise would be, but maybe if she were surveyed, she wouldn't report she is because of how painful it has been for her to be in that position. So she's put herself in a lower desire position.
That's entirely true, and I think that's something that also higher desire husbands out there probably can relate to is just saying, I can't put myself out there anymore." Um, and I know that's something we'll probably be talking about, but it's not getting a single no. But when
Mm.
you get the sense that your spouse does not desire this physical connection in the way that you desire it because it means something about intimacy to you,
Uh-huh.
you feel personal rejection. And
Right.
when that continues, it's just hard to do. And at some point, you say, do I really want to put myself out there? Do I really
Mhm.
want to have my heart injured again?
Right, it's a very natural response to that kind of a dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why some people actually are lower desire too, is that they have suppressed their sexuality and they struggle to get back in there. Song of Songs says three different times the advises do not awaken love until it so desires, which is, saying wait for the right context and everything. But there's this idea that if that's true, then you might need to awaken it. And as I've said,
Yes.
some people wake up very quickly. If you're that morning person that your eyes open and you're like, boom, I'm out of bed. Let me get my coffee. The birds are singing. Or you could be like the way I wake up, which is like there's no talking for 30 minutes. And let me slowly come to life. Well, same thing is true. Is I think sometimes we need to understand how desire works and recognize that when we're talking about higher desire or low desire, these are things that we experience, but some of
Mhm.
it is understanding that you can awaken it.
Yes, you can awaken it. So, what are the common emotional experiences that higher desire wives face that often get overlooked? It's easy to say what men have because I think that's a little bit louder in our current
Mhm,
culture.
mhm.
But what gets overlooked then for the woman's experience being the higher desire
Yeah, that's
spouse?
interesting because I think sometimes people have said, well, you don't really need anything special for higher desire wives because all you do is just take the advice out there and just flip it. And there are definitely things about the advice to higher desire husbands and lower desire wives that you can flip. But
Uh huh.
as you say, there's a slightly different emotional experience. If you're a husband who is not getting as much sex as he wants in his marriage, you're probably not thinking, "Well, it's because I'm must be unattractive and ugly."
Uh
Um,
huh. Right.
you're not thinking, "Well, we're really abnormal," because that's
Uh huh.
not what you've heard. But for higher desire wives, a lot of the things that they experience is, "I must not be attractive." And part of the reason is sometimes if you say, "My husband is not engaging with me as often as I'd like," the advice given is, "Well, you just need to put on some lingerie and some lipstick and go in there and seduce your husband." And then if you do that and it doesn't work, well,
Right.
the idea passed off to you was basically be prettier, be more
Uh huh.
attractive, be more
Uh huh.
sexually inviting, and then if it doesn't work, you're like, "Well, then I guess I'm not." And there
Right.
must be
Right.
something I'm ugly. And also we wives, well, women everywhere are kinda already primed to have body image issues by the world. Uh,
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
yeah,
Uh
yeah.
huh.
So, this can be seen as evidence for what we were already nervous about. There's also just that loneliness and sense of isolation. Does anyone understand what I'm going through? There's feeling like that freak, that abnormal thing. And I think another issue is a lot of wives immediately worry that he is being unfaithful in some way.
Right. That's an
And
easy place for them to think, like, he's probably getting it somewhere else, and that's why
yeah,
he's not pursuing me. Uh-huh.
yeah, and some of that is born of the idea that, well, all men want sex, and
Uh-huh.
the idea that some women have been raised with the idea that you can't really necessarily trust men, a
Mhm.
and,
Yes.
and
Uh-huh.
so again, you've been primed, so now your experience makes you think, "Well, he's obviously cheating on me or this or that, or he would wanna have sex with me." And I'll just say right now, sometimes that's true. Okay.
Mhm. Yep.
Sometimes a man is being unfaithful, particularly with pornography, which is one of the big reasons why some men are dealing with lower desire.
Mhm.
But it's not always true, and we can go there so quickly
Mhm.
and just
Right.
make the assumption instead of trying to figure out all the reasons that might be going into this situation.
So what's some more helpful questions to ask yourself when you're in that situation where you really feel like you've done everything, you followed the advice, and
Yeah.
it didn't quite work out?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is to start out with some curiosity about what's going on. Ask
Yes.
yourself what's going on with you. What does sex mean to you? That is one of the biggest questions I tell people now to ask themselves. What does sex mean to you? And is this coming from a good, healthy place for you? Most of the time it is. Most of the time, the higher desire wife really wants more connection with her husband, and she really feels loved and intimate when they're making love.
Uh-huh.
So sometimes the answer is, something's going on. I have an extra high desire because I'm seeking something that sex isn't intended to give, or I have stirred up my interest somewhere else. And now
Mhm.
I'm kinda
Mhm.
taking off. I'm thinking of course, we talked about pornography on the other side. It could be that the woman's watching pornography or she's reading erotica or something like that. And
Uh-huh.
so
Uh-huh.
I think the first thing is to ask yourself, kind of where is my desire and is this a good healthy desire? Like I said, most of the time the answer is yes. And so
Right,
if
right.
that's true, then ask yourself, why is there this gap? What's going on in my life that is making me more open to sex? And what's going on in his life that is presenting barriers to him engaging?
Mhm.
What could be going on with his view of sex, with his, physical health, with his background, with other things he do, other places he could be expending his energy.
Right. And I can speak to there's been periods in my own marriage where I've been the lower desire spouse, and my wife is a higher
Uh-huh.
desire spouse. And in those moments, there is a bit of like, wait a minute, it shouldn't be this way. Something's wrong with me.
Right.
I like, and when I spiral down that, it actually drives my desire even further away because now I'm freaking out about the fact that, I'm lower desire or whatever. So the problems tend to compound. It's usually not just one thing.
That's so true, and I think it's especially true of men. One of the things that I've noticed with this combination with a higher desire wife and a lower desire husband is that men define themselves typically more than women do about being potent, being capable,
Yes, what
being
they
you
do
yeah, what they do.
by
Yeah,
doing.
when you guys
Yes.
go to a new social event, y'all are like, "Hey,
Within 5
what do you
minutes, you
do?"
know what everyone
Excuse me.
does.
Yeah,
Yes.
and, we now live in a 55 plus community, and my husband's retired, and even
Uh-huh.
here, these guys
Uh-huh.
will very quickly they'll get into one of 2 things. What activities are you involved in? Because that's what are you capable about?
Right.
Then the other one is, what job did you retire from?
Uh-huh.
Okay, we gals could be talking about our kids, our homes, our,
Uh-huh.
I
Fashion,
whatever,
later.
recipes, it could be anything. But men want to feel capable. And so
Mhm.
sometimes when they don't feel capable regarding the sexual intimacy, if they feel like my wife is not satisfied with me or I can't do this or some of the other issues, if you've had erectile dysfunction, even once,
Right.
um, or whatever it is, and you think, "I can't even do this well," and some part of you is just like, "Well, don't even try."
Yep, exactly. I don't wanna face an opportunity to be embarrassed, so I'd rather just shut it down or avoid it,
Yeah, yeah,
or whatever.
yeah, and I now advise wives to really think through how they're going to say these things to their husband, to just be cognizant of that and make sure that we're affirming his manhood and affirming his capability in our eyes and saying, "You know what? This is a we thing. Let's figure this out together, and it's the reason I want you in my bed, husband, is
Uh-huh.
because I think you're very capable and I wanna be there with you."
Right, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe also because men are so intent on the doing nature, sometimes it really interferes with great sex because they're so
Mm,
focused on the doing, it's the process, it's the performance.
yeah.
When sex we can shift that frame together as a couple, and I've seen this so many times when it's about, "No, we're here to just enjoy each other." to thoroughly enjoy each other, who cares what happens or what comes of this, pun intended? Like, it's gonna be
Right.
great. Uh-huh.
Right. Even a quote unquote failed sexual encounter is still a sexual encounter. And it didn't fail because it brought you together and it
Yes.
created greater intimacy between you. And so, and the truth is, too, one of the best things that you can do for any intimacy area in your marriage, not just sexual intimacy, but emotional or recreational, whatever, is show up.
Uh-huh.
Just show up and say, "Okay, I don't know." It's okay that you're a participant. You don't have to be the MVP of everything every time.
Right.
And the more
Okay.
you do it, the better it will be.
Yeah, yeah. Alright, let's shift the conversation to a little bit like this, and I think this,
Yeah,
whether you're the higher desire husband or higher desire wife, there
yeah.
might be a point in time where you've asked yourself, "Maybe I married the wrong person."
Ugh.
Because you look across the other side, and there's men who want their wives. They're pursuing their wives. They want more from them, and the wife is frigid in that case, like, "If only I had that guy, then we wouldn't have this sexual desire difference." That's a common thought. How do you work through that one?
Absolutely. In fact, it was probably a couple of weeks ago that I was hearing from some hard desire wives who said that very thing, that is, like, so hard because they think, "Well, if I had married another guy, they would be so happy that they married me."
Yes,
Um,
uh-huh.
but then we all remind ourselves
Uh-huh.
there's a reason we get picked the guy that we liked, and it wasn't just the sex, of course.
Right. Uh-huh.
We want this person. I think 2 issues is that have been taught from different angles, but Christians have also picked them up, is a lot of the secular world will talk about sexual compatibility. Are
Yes.
you compatible with this person? This is one of the reasons that they say you should have sex before marriage because you should make sure that you're compatible.
Yeah, it's the
Well,
test drive concept.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. Well, we've already demonstrated in our conversation, your sexual interest and capacity could change over the course of marriage. So, even if you were sexually compatible, as my husband and I were on day 1 of our
Uh-huh.
marriage, that doesn't mean that we didn't have struggles, challenges, things to work out later on. So, you're not a static person where you're either compatible or not. That's a
Right.
silly concept. The other thing that we've had in the church, a lot of times people have picked up the sexual prosperity message, which is
Okay. If I do
essentially
everything right,
Mhm,
my marriage and
mhm.
my sex life will be
Yeah.
amazing with no issues and no
It
problems.
and it could be you did everything right on the way to marriage, you maintained your sexual integrity, waited for the wedding night. The other idea is, we're doing everything else right, or I'm being a really, really good wife. And so why
Mhm.
isn't God rewarding me with this? And
Yes.
and those 2 things I think combine to make us feel like you either fit or you don't. You're either gonna
Yeah.
have it or you don't.
Uh-huh.
But there's a much better way to look at this, and there's really good research on this too. It's this the idea of a sexual growth mindset. And the idea
Yeah.
is that if you go into your sexual relationship recognizing what scripture tells us that
Mm.
we are not all living in perfect Eden right now, and that life presents challenges. And
Uh-huh.
if you see those challenges as just part of being in a sexual relationship with your spouse, then you'll actually weather them pretty well. You'll take a growth mindset and say, you know what? Here's a challenge. Let's figure out how to work it out. And we're going to have to do this numerous times over the course of our marriage as we change. And even if it's not desire, even if your sexual desires stayed the same your whole lives, you'll have to negotiate something else. Believe me, I'm at an age now that my husband and I are having to rethink sexual positions because joints hurt,
Uh-huh.
we and
Right.
or our bodies don't get
Uh-huh.
aroused in the same way that they used to. So you will
Mhm.
have things you have to figure out. So it doesn't mean you married the wrong person. It means that you married the person you loved and they married the person they love and y'all can figure this out. You just have to recognize it's kind of part of the deal.
And I think believing otherwise is a fantasy, and
Uh-huh.
I don't think it does any net good for your existing relationship because it's a distraction from the real work of what is this marriage dynamic right now teaching me what I need to do to grow, like as you said. It's that
Yeah, and we don't
growth.
we don't really like to have to go through tough stuff to have personal growth.
No, we don't, do we?
And I just as I laugh about that, because 'cause I'm laughing about
Uh-huh.
myself too, I know though that somebody out there is going through something, a challenge that's far worse than this will just personally grow me. They're in a very
Yeah.
difficult situation. So I wanna say I have compassion for that enormously. I'm not saying that I think you're supposed to be in a terrible situation, a terrible mismatch here,
No,
and
no.
which is why we're talking about this and we're talking about ways to deal with it.
Mhm.
But yeah, it is an opportunity for growth.
Talk more about just this idea. I just wanna be desired. Ah,
That's
if
huge.
only he'd just initiate a little more often. He's so distracted with work, projects, kids, school, whatever. I just feel like he doesn't think about me. I just wanna be wanted.
Yeah, that is huge. And actually, having heard from higher desire spouses, men and women, this is something I hear all the time is that they don't want their spouse to come as like to schlep themselves to the bedroom as a duty and be like, okay, I guess we'll check this off my to-do list. That's
Yeah, yeah.
that's
No one
not
likes that.
well,
Uh-uh.
and if someone is doing that, don't do that. That is
No.
coercion, is pressure, it's not okay. Don't do that.
It's not yeah, there's no heart. There's no heart in it.
Yeah, but what
It's idle.
really but yeah, but most people, it's not just that they want a sexual release, they want to be desired. Um,
Yes.
and one of the scriptures that I've said is kind of the higher desire wife mantra is the one that says, "I belong to my beloved and his desire is for me." That is
Yes.
what
Uh-huh.
we want to feel.
Mhm.
So in that case, though, I think that you should express that to your spouse
Mhm.
and let them know, listen, I don't want you to just do this out of duty. I want you to enjoy it. That I believe that this is supposed to be mutually desired and satisfying. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
that equally desired and satisfying, but you should both want and enjoy it. And letting him know what it's about, that it's not about release, but it's about the connection you feel. And maybe even describe what that feels like to you. When we're together, I just feel like there's this bond between us that our hearts are just merging or that our bodies are, a single that truly are the one flesh, that we've
Mhm.
come back together like lock and key or whatever you wanna describe. But tell them that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And also, I would say ask your spouse who's a lower desire than you, "What is it in our marriage that we do that makes you feel particularly close to me?"
Yes.
And make sure you pay attention to that and do that for them, but then also say, "That's what sex feels like to me."
That's good. That kinda helps paint the picture for them. They see what it is.
Yeah.
Also, maybe a related question is, what do I do that drives you away?
Oh,
It
very
could
good.
be because we want something, I want you to desire me, that we use that as the basis for a lot of criticism with our spouse, thinking we can criticize them enough. We don't think it's criticism at the time. We think it's correction, suggesting, or other
Helping. It's
yeah, helping,
helping.
right? Nudging to kinda get what we want.
Uh-huh.
And it's criticism because it's thankless in it,
Mm.
and we think we can mold their behavior through criticizing, and probably we get that from our family of origin. Parents kinda tend to do that with their kids by telling them all the things they're doing wrong in the hopes that their child will make better decisions. But you do
Yeah.
that to your spouse, it can really drive someone away also.
That's a good point too, because actually with our kids, a lot of times that does come from a really good place because we have learned a lot in life and we're
Uh-huh.
wanting to share our wisdom with our kids, but we can kind of like spill it all out and it comes out as, as you said, here's all the things you're doing wrong. And we can come to our spouses with good intentions too and blow it in how we say it, how things come across, what we're doing. So it's really good to ask about those obstacles. I think you've referred to them before as like breaks or something,
Yeah. Yeah,
things
yeah,
that
yeah.
put on the brakes in
Yep.
your intimacy. So yeah,
Mhm.
love that point.
So, in preparation for this episode, I asked my Facebook group, of which we have many higher desire wives in there, and everyone's welcome. One woman said this: "Sometimes I wonder if I'm considered higher desire spouse because I'm not as sexually satisfied as my husband. He orgasms almost every time, and then rolls over and goes to sleep. But what about me? I don't feel well sexed. Can you explain how I can help improve my dynamic?
Yeah. Wow, what a great question, and I have heard this from more than one Higher Desire wife too. I love that you have all those ladies in your community. I actually have a community too of Higher Desire wives, so it's really good for these wives to not feel alone and have places to go, and
Mhm.
this is an issue. I think sometimes a wife can be a little more assertive in pursuing sex because it's not going as much as she would like, or it's not totally there, and so she's kinda chasing success, and
Mhm.
it's a little like you're not really having the meal that sates you, you know? You came
Right.
you came there and you had rice cakes and you ate rice cakes and yeah, that was great, but you really
I'm
needed a
still hungry.
full meal. Yeah, you're
Uh-huh.
still hungry, and so you needed the whole thing, and there really is an orgasm gap. I think that it's about the 90% range or something like that of men who orgasm every time, and
Mhm.
somewhere in the 60s for women who orgasm every time. Some of
Mm.
that, I think, is because we don't have enough information out there for how women orgasm,
Mhm.
which I'm sure you've dealt with that, that it's
Right.
not just intercourse, and that there are other options to help your wife reach orgasm. So if this wife doesn't know all that stuff, well, she's got plenty of stuff in your content there that she can read about, and my stuff too. But sometimes it's that. Another thing, though, is it may be some of her own hormones and body stuff. So I always say that if you're really struggling to reach orgasm, please talk to your healthcare provider because there could be something going on that you don't know about.
Something physiological, right.
Yeah, and
It's
if
not
it's
just in
something
your head, it could be in your body, right.
yeah, and if there is something that can be resolved, resolve that. Another issue is it usually takes a lot longer for her to get there than for
Mhm.
him. Sorry, guys, you're gonna have to be patient. You're gonna have to put in some more effort. It's just how
Uh-huh.
we're made. And so maybe she hasn't had the chance, or maybe when sex is over, she feels like it's over, he feels like it's over. And it might be that you need to speak up and say, that was great, but I'm not done. Can you stay here and do this or kiss me even while I do whatever, and keep seeking that and speaking up and saying, this is something I definitely want. Um, and so I would just be really focusing on figuring out what's going on and how to get you there and be willing to speak up and say, this is what it's going to take for me to really feel satisfied and great about this experience.
Great. Now, I'm hoping you're willing to get a little personal here, but I wanna hear about your
Okay.
breakthrough moments for you in your
Uh-huh.
own marriage as the higher desire wife. Are there any stories where you had some really good conversations or some inflection points, some real wins in your understanding with your husband as you both have
Absolutely.
had the challenges working through this?
Well, let me say, first of all, for those wives out there who have experienced a lot of emotional pain for this, I do get it in the sense that I c I can recall moments where I rolled over and fell asleep crying
Mhm.
because I had repeatedly tried to initiate sex and it didn't happen. And I was wondering, "What's wrong with me? What's going on? Is he done with me? Is this the rest of our marriage?" Um, Even though lots of other things in our marriage were going well. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it just I understand those emotions and how the negative stuff can just crowd everything else out in your mind, and it can feel like a pile on, and you're very hurt. So, I'm saying all that so you kinda know that that's where we started, okay?
Okay. Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
so it wasn't good, but there are several moments that I could say. One of the big ones was when we went on vacation. When we
Uh-huh.
went, we actually went on a cruise and got away, and the beautiful thing about the cruise is that there was a point at which our phones no longer worked.
Uh-huh. No more distractions.
Uh-huh. No more distractions, and my husband, who had a very demanding job and was always working, working too much, if you ask me, and when he wasn't working, was doing activities with our sons or at the church. Suddenly, he was like, "Hey, let's go."
Uh-huh.
And I was like, "Wait a minute." And I thought, "I have my husband back." And
Uh-huh.
I realized that was a moment I was like, "This is not about me. This is
Mhm.
not about me." And he'd been telling me it's not about you, but that's when it really hit home that there was other stuff going on. And now that I knew, well, it's about the stress, it's about the schedule, it's about, location or other things. And sometimes actually some relational conflict we were having, to be honest, at the time. But once I realized it was all of that, then I could say, okay, I can let go of all this stuff on my deal and we can just work the problem.
Right, you could be less anxious about it yourself.
Yeah.
'Cause right.
The the other thing that happened is I basically talked to him about all the stuff and how I was feeling, and
Uh-huh.
he began to verbally and affectionately reassure me that he loved me, wanted me, enjoyed our time together, thought I was beautiful, all those things. And
Mhm.
so, and Lord desire husbands out there, Lord desire spouses, actually of both
Uh-huh.
sides. If you don't have to want sex as much as your spouse, but if you could reassure them that you
Uh-huh.
do want to be with them, that can go a
Mhm.
long way. And so that really helped. And then I'll give you one other that practical. And so we started kind of working our way back and doing better and better
Mhm.
and better and getting more and more on the same page on this. But then there was the moment when I decided that I would kind of flip a switch from initiation to availability.
Okay.
And so what I started doing more, not every time, sometimes I would certainly initiate, but
Uh-huh.
sometimes I would just say like, "Hey, I'm really in the mood." And so I know you're busy right now. I said, "But I'm gonna go to bed, and so I'm gonna be reading for about 20 minutes. If you wanna come in there and engage, I'll be there for about 20 minutes completely available,
Uh-huh.
and let me know or just come on in." And then I just told myself, "All right, I'm available, but I'm not getting a no. I'm not assuming it's gonna happen. I'm just leaving the window open."
Right.
And so, if it didn't happen, I wasn't nearly as disappointed.
But you had to be genuine in that. It's not a
Yeah,
tactic,
yeah,
it's not a trick, it's not a strategy. You have to
right.
be really okay with him accepting or not accepting your
But the
offer.
the interesting thing is he actually started accepting more in my case,
Uh-huh.
and I
Right,
think
'cause
it's
you made it easy for him to say yes or no without
because
punishment. Yeah.
exactly, and so it was that, and so, the kind of the pressure was off. It also gave him time to think through, "Am I interested or could I get interested?" Or and also, I sometimes had planted the thing, "Well, I'm gonna go put on this,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna be in
Uh-huh.
the bedroom," and then maybe I set the visual in his head, and that could
Uh-huh.
get things going. So but you're right, I had to believe it, and I did. I finally was like, "You know what? I'm just gonna offer up when I'm available, and it happens or it doesn't happen." But that really helped because, yeah, I mean, we had more successes after that.
That's good. That helps because now you're using things like anticipation to help.
Yes.
Sometimes for, like, lower desire spouses, it feels like an intrusion. Sex feels like an intrusion often.
Mm,
The other
mm.
person wants it and like, no." But when you kinda set that stage and kinda like, "No, this is an invitation," I think it really helped that moment go
Yeah.
a lot easier in that case. I'm not saying this is gonna work for every couple listening to this, of
Right,
course.
right. But
This
but
is
but
what
you're just giving up my personal stuff, so this is one
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
things. And I mean, that's one of the ideas in my book, but there are a lot of others
Uh-huh.
for ways to, just approach sex a little differently to hopefully have more times together, fewer missed connections.
Great, great. So, Jay, as we close up here, I think as we try to close the desire gaps in our marriages, and I know it takes time, but what is it that you want people to walk away with or hear from you as they work through this out in their relationship?
Yeah, it definitely is a process worth doing. But I've often said that the people I know who've made a really big turnaround in the sex life in their marriages, they've all told me it's taken a year or more. Um, But they've
Mhm.
also all said they would do it over again in a heartbeat. But as you do that, I think you really do need to pay attention to your individual self as well. Okay, so I'm in a one flesh relationship with my husband, and I'm very tied to him, and what happens to him matters to me, what happens to me matters to him. And
Right.
we are connected in that way. But at the same time, we each have some responsibility for caring for
Of your
our
own.
own hearts,
Yeah.
our own minds, for having our own relationship with God and believing what he says about us, which is that you are wanted, you are loved, you are worthwhile.
Hmm.
You should have a pleasure in your sex life.
Uh-huh.
And God did make that for you, for each of you. And so I think as we're working on all this, we just need to embrace those truths. And yeah, and just know that kind of God's got us in his hand as we pursue the design that he intended us for us to have in our marriage.
That's really good. Where can people go to find your latest book and more information about what you do?
Yeah, so The Higher Desire Wife, and I always have to read the subtitle because I can never remember it. Understanding, it's long. Understanding and help for Christian women navigating mismatched sex drives. Okay, so you can find it. The best place to buy this, or the cheapest place to buy this, is Baker Bookhouse, directly from the publisher. They have a 30% off. But, if you've got your Amazon account or your favorite places to buy, it's anywhere and everywhere that books are sold. And you may want to provide a link where, that gives you a little kickback or something if people buy through you. Um, but yeah, so it's everywhere there, and they can find me at hotholyhumorous.com. And I'm also on Facebook, Instagram. I know you're very active on Instagram. I'm trying to do more. It's a little outside my
Yeah.
comfort zone to be so
Uh-huh.
image driven. I'm a word girl, but
Uh-huh.
I'm getting on there more and people can find me there.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Please share it, along with our apps Intimately Us and Just Between Us, with your married friends. I promise they will thank you for life. If you want a more meaningful sexual and intimate connection in your marriage, I invite you to check out my Get Your Marriage On program. Over 100 couples have said this program packs tremendous value and has helped their intimacy grow to the next level. Now, go get your marriage on.